Masechet Ketubot, Daf Nun Bet. Today we're going to be talking about the obligation of a husband to redeem his wife if she's captured and to also to pay for her healing. We saw that there's a basic obligation for a man. It's written in the Ketubah to redeem his wife. There is a difference between whether he's a Yisrael or a Kohen. If he's a Yisrael, it says that I promise to redeem you and bring you back as a wife. Since she was violated unwillingly by force, therefore, a Yisrael is permitted to take her back. Whereas, if he is a Kohen, then the language of the Ketubah does not say that, because the Kohen is prohibited to her, even though she was unwilling. And so it says he obligates himself, the Kohen obligates himself to redeem her, and then she will go and live wherever she lives, elsewhere, and they will no longer be married. All right, that's the two cases. Mishnah also mentioned that if a wife gets captured and the man says, I don't want to redeem her, I want to divorce her now, and I'll pay her ketubah, she can redeem herself from the amount of the ketubah. That is not okay. He has to first redeem her. He saved up that money from perot, and then afterwards, if he wants to divorce, that's a separate story. All right, now we're going to discuss cases where there is a prohibition within the marriage, and so there will be a problem for them to go back and live together, and therefore that clause in the marriage for Yisrael that says that I will take you back cannot be fulfilled. We have machloket. Amar Abaye. Amana lekohen gadol hayav liftota, she'ani kore ba ubekohenet ahadrinach lemedinatech. If an almana is married to a kohen gadol, it is a prohibited marriage, and they're not supposed to stay together. Although the marriage is chal, they are halachically married, but it's prohibited. And if she gets captured, the Kohen Gadol husband has to redeem her, because I can fulfill the technical words of the Ketubah that says, regarding Kohen, he's Kohen Gadol, so obviously he's going to use this language, I will return you to your city, wherever you live. And so when he redeems her, then they will divorce, and she will return to her city. So she is obligated according to that language of the stipulation in the Ketubah. Mamzeret untina l'Yisrael eno chayav liftota. However, if the man is a Yisrael and he's married to someone he's prohibited to, like a mamzeret or a netina, he does not have to redeem her if she gets captured. She'en ani koreh ba ve'ot binech li le'intu, because he cannot fulfill the clause that is written for a Yisrael, which says that I will return you to me as a wife. He is not permitted to return mamzeret and netina to himself as a wife, and therefore the stipulation does not apply to him. He doesn't have to redeem her. That's Abaye's opinion. Rava Amar kol she'isur shibya gorem la chayav liftota. Isur davar acher gorem la eno chayav liftota. Rava, however, says no. A man only has to redeem his wife if the prohibition, because of her captivity, is what will cause her to be prohibited. So, therefore, in the case of a Kohen who is married to someone he's permitted to marry, and then she gets captured, she becomes prohibited because of the captivity. Only in that case does he have to prohibit her, does he have to redeem her. But isur davar acher gorem la eno chayav liftota. But if it's a different reason, like the Kohen Gadol married to an almana, in that case he does not have to redeem her, because it's not the captivity that's making her prohibited. She was already prohibited to him. So in any case where the man is prohibited, it doesn't matter if he's Israel and cannot return her to him, or if he's a Kohen, where the language says you're going to go to your city. Nevertheless, if it's a prohibited marriage, he does not have to redeem her. So we see that Rava is more lenient on the Kohen Gadol. He does not have to redeem her. All right, very interesting machloket. We're going to try to see if the Rava and Abaye match up with two Tanaim, lema ketanae, which we'd rather not do, because every Amorah ideally would be able to explain himself according to both Tanaim, which is what we're ultimately going to say. But lema ketana hamadir et ishto v'nishbet. Someone who makes a vow that he will not derive any benefit from his wife. Now, that he makes a vow rather that his wife may not derive any benefit from him. Right? I'm not going to give you anything. They into a fight or something. Now, a man is not allowed to do this, and if he does, he has to divorce his wife and pay her a ketubah, because this is not a marriage if she cannot derive benefit from him. So now they are prohibited. When he makes that vow, this is a prohibited marriage. He has to divorce her, and then she gets captured. So this is a similar case in that it's a prohibited marriage, but there's an obligation to pay the ransom. Rabbi Eliezer says you have to redeem her and then you pay the ketubah when she comes back. Rabbi Yoshua says no, just give her a ketubah because they can't be together anyway, and it's a prohibited marriage, so therefore he does not have to redeem. So let's see how this matches up. First, we're going to finish the reading the whole Baraita. אמר רבי נתן, שאלתי את סומכוס, כשאמר רבי יהושע נותן לה כתובתה, ואינו פודה, רבי Yoshua's opinion that he does not have to redeem her, what case is it exactly? כשדירה ולבסוף נשפט, או בנשפט ולבסוף כהדירה. This is talking about a case where first the man made a vow and said, you can have no benefit from me, and then she was captured, so that the prohibition of the marriage, his obligation to divorce her came first? Or is it where she first got captured, and then he said, I vow I'm not going to give my wife anything? He says, actually, I did not hear a tradition about this, but I can figure it out. It makes sense that he made the vow first, and only then did she get captured. Because if you say she got captured first and then he made a vow, and according to the Rabbi Yoshua, he doesn't have to redeem her, well then a person will use this subterfuge. A man could do that all the time. Anytime his wife gets captured and now he's going to pay this big amount of money, he'll say, I vow I will not give anything to my wife. And then he will have no obligation to redeem his wife, and that would be preposterous. Then he could get out of his basic ketubah obligation at all the time. So therefore, it must be talking about a case where first he made the vow, they got into a fight or something, and then she got captured. Since he already made the vow not to give him anything, so he has to divorce her. So in that case, he can divorce her and does not have to pay. Now, Ma'ila b'madir eshet kohen kami palge. So what case exactly are we talking about? Let's try to assume, that this baraita is limited to a case where the man is a kohen, and this kohen is making a vow not to give anything to his wife. The benefit, or the reason why we're saying it's a kohen, is that if it's a Yisrael saying it, well then, according to all opinions, he would not be able to fulfill his stipulation because he cannot return her to him. And in the Ketubah of Yisrael, it says, I'll redeem you and you'll be my wife again, but it can't be my wife again. So if the guy is Yisrael, then according to both Abaye and Rava, he would not have to redeem her. So it must be that this is, we're trying to say that this is talking about a Kohen. Abaye says, like Rabbi Eliezer, that he has to redeem her because he still can fulfill the technical language of the Ketubah that says, I will redeem you and then you will live in your city. So even though he made a vow, and he's there, they can't stay together, nevertheless, he redeems her, and he still fulfills the stipulation. She will go to her city. Whereas Rabbi Yoshua says he does not have an obligation. That would be the same as Rava, who said, as long as there is a prohibition that's besides the prohibition caused by her being violated, and any other prohibition, and this vow is a prohibition from them staying together. In any case of such a prohibition, he does not have to pay. So you see, it actually could match up as long as we limit it to that case. But this is not necessarily so. First, we're going to try to reject this lining up of the two Tanaim with two Amoraim. In one way, we're going to reject that way, but then we're going to reject it in another way that will be successful. And Abaye and Rava can explain themselves according to both Tanaim. So we say, Lo hachab meskinan kigoshen nazra'ihi v'kiyem lahu. No, maybe this Baraita is talking about a case where she is the one that made a vow, and she says, I will not get any benefit from you. She's the one that gets angry at him and makes a vow. Rabbi Eliezer sabar hu noten esba ben shineha. Rabbi Eliezer says even though she made the vow, the law is that a husband has permission to nullify the vow when he hears it on that day. Since he did not annul the vow and he let it keep going, he is the one that's responsible for the breakdown of the marriage. The Talmud uses expression, he puts his finger between his teeth. It means something like, you bite your thumb at me is the old expression. It means a curse or a vow. This must have been some kind of gesture that was made when someone makes a vow. The point is that he is the one responsible, even though she made the vow, nevertheless he's responsible because he could have annulled it and didn't. Since he is responsible for the breakdown of the marriage, therefore he does have to pay, and he has to redeem her. That's Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yoshua says, no, he not nasba ben shinah. She's the one that put her finger between her teeth. She's responsible for the vow. So since she said that she doesn't want to derive any benefit, so the man is off the hook. You made a vow, then you got captured, so that's your problem. I don't have to redeem you. Okay. So that's what we try to say, and that way the machloket is independent, has nothing to do with Abai and Rava. But we say, hold on. If she's the one that caused the breakdown of the marriage, then why does he have to pay a ketubah, right? If she is at fault for ruining the marriage, then he's not responsible. He's only responsible to pay the ketubah if he's the one that made the vow. So this would not make sense according to the Yehoshua, that he pays the vow, that he pays the ketubah. And furthermore, the continuation of the conversation in the Braita also would not make sense. V'tu amar Rabbi Natan, she'alti tzumchush keshamar, Rabbi Yehoshua noten la ketubata, ve'eno podeh keshidral basof nishbet, or b'nishbet basof dira, v'amar li lo shamati. When Rabbi Natan asked Tzumchos, according to Rabbi Yehoshua, who says that you have to pay that he does not have to redeem her, but he does have to pay the ketubah. Is it talking about when the vow came first and then captured, or captured first and then the vow when he said he didn't know? Well, what would be the question if she's the one that's responsible and she made the vow? Mali hidira ulbasof nishbet, mali nishbet ulbasof hidira. Then it doesn't make a difference, the order, because either way, we can't say that, he can use it as Sumchos' answer was, it must be that he made the vow first and then she got captured. Otherwise, a man could always use a subterfuge. Anytime his wife gets captured, he'll just make a vow. But if she's the one that made a vow, then we have no worry that it's going to be used as subterfuge. This whole question and the answer would not make any sense. So therefore, we are abandoning this line of interpretation that she's the one that made the vow. Ela leolam da'adera ihu, he made the vow as we originally thought. And in fact, Abai could explain himself according to both opinions, and Rava also according to both Tanaim. Abai meteres l'tameh. Almana lekohen gadol kula amala pligide chayav liftota. If it's almana to Kohen Gadol, where he can fulfill the technical words of the ketubah, yes, he has to redeem her. Whereas if he is a Yisrael and his marriage is prohibited, he cannot fulfill the words of the ketubah that says, I will return you to me as a wife, and therefore he does not have to redeem her. And everyone would agree, both Tanaim would agree. And if it was a case where Kohen is the one that made the vow and said, I will not give any benefit to you, then also everyone agrees that he has to redeem her, because in that case, since he's a Kohen and he wrote the language of the Ketubah that I will redeem you and you will live in your city, he can still fulfill that clause, because even though he made a vow, he can redeem her and then he will divorce her and she will live in that city. So he promised, he agreed to such a case. It's equivalent to Almanah Kohen Gadol. Ki pligi b'madir eshet Yisrael, but the machloket would be in the one case of a Yisrael who made a vow. Interestingly, even though a Kohen who makes a vow has to redeem, a Yisrael who made a vow does not have to redeem, because in his ketubah, he writes, I will redeem you and return you unto me as a wife, and Yisrael can't do that. So, but in this case, that would be the subject of the key point of the machloket between the Tanaim. Rabbi Eliezer would say that he does have to redeem her, even in this case, because we follow the obligation as it was made originally when he wrote the Ketubah. When they were first married, it was a permitted marriage. There was nothing wrong with the marriage. And he said, I will redeem you and return you to me as a wife. Subsequently, they got into a fight and he made this vow. And so now he can no longer do that obligation. But nevertheless, he obligated himself before he made the vow. So that obligation remains in effect even after the vow. So he does have to pay. But Rabbi Yoshua says we're going to look at it at the end. Now that she is currently taken captive after the vow, can he fulfill this stipulation? He cannot, because he can't take her back as a wife. And that, therefore, is a subject of machloket. They would all agree in the case where she's a mamzeret. In that case, from the beginning, it was prohibited, and there was no way of making the stipulation. In that case, Rabbi Eliezer would agree that he does not ransom. Okay, good. So that's how Abaye could explain it. Rava also. Rava, remember, was the one that said that he only has to redeem, a man only has to redeem his wife if the prohibition of the marriage is because of her captivity. So, because she was violated, the Kohen couldn't. But if there's any other prohibition, he does not have to redeem her. Even Almanah Kohen Gadol, even though she's going to a different city, no, it's a prohibited marriage, so he doesn't have to redeem her. Rather, the machloket would be either a Kohen or Yisrael who make a vow, and it would apply to both of them. Rabbi Eliezer Azel Batar Meikara, Rabbi Yoshua Azel Batar Basof. In both of these cases where the marriages were in the beginning fine marriages, there's nothing wrong. He was allowed to be with them. But he made the vow subsequently, and again here, Rabbi Eliezer says, follow the original time of the Ketubah when these were permitted marriages, and so therefore he has to redeem her. Whereas according to Rabbi Yoshua, at this point, at the end, now that he made the vow and she's captured, there is a prohibition against the marriage. And according to Rava, anytime there is a prohibition about the marriage, he does not have to redeem her. And so again, Rava is more lenient than Abaye, but we see that both Rava and Abaye can explain their shitot according to both of the Tanaim. All right, now we get to Nishbet, Chayav Liftota, a woman is taken captive, he is obligated to redeem her. What if a wife is captured while her husband is alive, but then, in the meantime, before he's able to redeem her, he dies? And so the inheritance goes to his sons. Do his sons have an obligation? That's not a basic obligation of the sons. So what do we do in this case? Hikir ba ba'ala, Yoshin Chayavin Liftota. If the husband, before he died, knew about the captivity, so then that means that in his mind he already decided, okay, my assets are going to have to be given over as a guarantee to pay for the ransom. So since already he knew about it, already in his mind, he is giving the money, so it's already indebted, and the sons will have to redeem her. But if this father, even though he was alive at the time, but he didn't know about it, and he died, so then the money never was subjugated to pay for this. And Yoshin Chayvin Liftota, it's a basic obligation of the Ketubah while the man is alive. But after he's dead, the estate does not have to pay for her to be redeemed. I'm guessing if it's their mother, then they may want to do that, but it's up to them. It may be their stepmother, and maybe they don't want to. Levi wanted to follow this halacha with the man who knew about it, and then he died, and then he wanted so that he would extract money from the inheritance to pay for her ransom. Rav said that my beloved one, he's talking about his uncle, Rabbi Chia, the word dod also means beloved, so that's what he called him. Ela kiha detanya. The halacha does not follow that baraita, but rather the following baraita: Nishbet achar mitat ba'ala, and yetimim chayvin liftota. If someone is captured and then he dies, if he dies first and then she's captured, the inheritors are not, the sons are not obligated. That's if he dies first. But not only that, even if she is captured when the husband is alive, and then he dies, they do not have to redeem her. The reason is because the clause in the Ketubah only says, I will redeem you and return you as my wife. But now he's dead at the time of trying to ransom her, and therefore, since she cannot go back to him as a wife, therefore, there is no obligation, and it makes no difference whether he knew about it or didn't know about it. And so he says, we follow this as a halacha, and therefore you cannot force the sons to redeem her. Let's say someone's captured and the captors are demanding 10 times of her value. More than either what's on the slave market or more than the usual, what kidnappers usually extract for such a person. They want 10 times as much. Is he obligated to pay that much? Pam rishona podeh. The answer is the first time, yes. Mikan ve'elach rasa podeh, rasa no podeh. But after that, if he wants to, he can spend money and redeem her. But he's not legally obligated by the ketubah to keep overpaying this amount. It would be unlimited. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer. And podin et hashivuyin yoter al kedei damehem mipnei tikun haolam. However, Rabbi Rashbag says that no, even the first time, a man is not obligated. Actually, one should not pay the captives more than the value because of tikkun haolam, the betterment of the world. This is a really important principle that we don't want to set a precedent of overpaying, because when you do that, then that'll entice more kidnappers to kidnap more people and demand more money. And it'll just go on, and it'll make the whole thing worse. So by limiting it and say, no, we have a limit to what we're willing to pay, then it might not be worth it for kidnappers because they know they're not going to get so much money, and they won't ask for exorbitant sums. So we keep it as a compromise. You only kidnap a few people and keep it at a price that people can afford. Okay, so that's been, even though in one particular case it might not be good for this person who will have a hard time getting his wife back, but for the betterment of everyone else, this is nowadays happens all the time when someone is captured by a foreign government, and the United States or whatever government has to decide if they're going to pay or trade prisoners, and at what price, and what kind of precedent that will send in Israel also. So very deep and complicated issues. And here you see the rabbis are already struggling with these moral dilemmas a long time ago. What we see from this baraita is that we pay according to her normal price. That he has to pay, even if the normal price is more than the marriage the marriage contract. If she's a betula, the 200 zuz. If on the normal market value is 300 zuz, he would still have to pay it, even according to Rashbag. But we have a problem. We have a contradictory baraita that says nishpet v'yumbakshim mimenu ad asara b'ktubata pam rishona podeh mikan ve'elech rasa podeh rasa eno podeh. Tanakama is the same thing. They're asking for 10 times. You have to pay that. Husband has to pay that once, but that's it. After that, he doesn't have to pay more than her value. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel omer, im haya pirkona keneged ketubada podeh, v'im lav eno podeh. Rashbag, however, says there's an upper limit. But in this baraita, he says the upper limit is not the normal, her regular value, but rather the upper limit is her ketubah, which means if he's there demanding 300, but the ketubah says that he has to pay only 200, he says that he doesn't have to redeem her unless the the value, the amount that they're demanding is less than the 200. So now we have a contradiction, because according to the first baraita, sounds like he has to pay the market value, even if it's more than the 200. And according to this, he only has to pay up to the amount of the ketubah. In my example is 200. So how do we reconcile these? Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, tere kule itle. In fact, Rashbag accepts both of these leniencies. It's a leniency to him. I mean, not such a leniency to her, she may remain captured, but leniency to him that he pays the lower amount of either the market value or the ketubah value. He doesn't have to pay any more than either of those in any case. We now move to the husband's obligation in the ketubah to pay for his wife's medical benefits. Lakta chayav lerapota. So now we're talking about not while the wife is alive, where the husband has to pay for all of her medical expenses, but now the husband died. What is the obligation of the inheritance to pay for the widow? So the law is an almana does get fed from the inheritance of the orphans, usricha refuah, harehi kimzonot, and if she needs medical attention, that is the same as that's included under sustenance. So yes, they are obligated. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel omer, refuah sheyesh la kisba nitrapet miketubata, she'en la kisba harehi kimzonot. However, Rashbag says it depends what kind of medical treatment it is. If it's something that has a set amount, it's one-time procedure. Someone broke her arm and she needs a cast, it costs $1,000. In that case, if it's a set amount, she has to pay it from her own money, from the amount of the ketubah. The inheritance, of course, has to pay out her ketubah. It's one lump sum, and so she will deduct from that amount the one-time medical expense. She'en la kitzbah, but if it's something that's a chronic disease that she's going to need medication every day for a long term, or she's going to have to keep coming back for doctor visits, then that is like sustenance, and therefore the orphans have to pay for that from the inheritance and not from the ketubah. So it's better for her if it's billed as something that is continuous, because then the orphans pay for it. It's better for the orphans if it's billed as a one-time expense, because then it's deducted from the amount of the ketubah. So kind of like today with medical insurance, sometimes if you bill it one way, they don't pay. If you bill it a different way, then they do pay. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, asu hakazat dam be'eretz Yisrael kirefuah she'en la kisbaha. Bloodletting was a general thing that was done. It was done to prevent, not only if someone was sick, but also on some regular basis, so that people would remain healthy. That's what they thought. So they consider this in Eretz Yisrael like a treatment that does not have a fixed cost, because you do it, people would do it on a regular basis, and therefore it was part of regular sustenance that the orphans had to pay for. The relatives of Rabbi Yochanan had a stepmother who required medical attention every single day. So since it's chronic, the orphans had to pay for it. And so the orphans came to Rabbi Yochanan. He gave them some legal advice and said, go to the doctor and get a one fixed sum for all of the treatment, for the whole disease, even though she's going to have to go back to him and get medical treatment every single day. Don't pay every day. Ask the doctor for one lump sum, $100,000 for the entire thing. And once you do that, then it'll be billed to her ketubah, and she will be deducted from that. She will have to pay for it, and you guys, the orphans, will not have to. So now you see Rabbi Yochanan is giving advice to his relatives, the orphans, against this stepmother, who he's not related to, and so he's helping them out. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Nasinu asmenu keorchei dayanin. After Rabbi Yochanan gave that advice, he says, I shouldn't have done that. I regret it. Well, look, we made ourselves, meaning he made himself, like a lawyer, like a legal advisor. We learn in Mishnah, Al tas asmecha keorchei dayanim. In Pirkei Avot, do not make yourself like a lawyer. In rabbinic courts, lawyers are not allowed. Rather, the judges, they are objective and they want to hear from the litigants themselves. And so one should not insert himself and give one of the litigants a loophole. Here's how you can get around it. Say this, don't say that. That is a problem. It's a obstruction of justice. And Rabbi Yochanan said, I should not have done that. So now the Gemara asks, what didn't he know that before? What was he thinking when he first gave them advice, and how come he changed his mind? At first he said, he quoted the pasuk in Yeshaya that said, do not hide yourself from your own flesh and blood. These are my relatives. So there's a special mitzvah to go and help your relatives, and now he can help his orphan relatives with a chronic expense that they will have. But after he thought about it, he says, I'm an important person. Rabbi Yochanan is the leading sage of the whole generation, and so he has to stand above that, and he has to be objective. He is the leading teacher, judge, for sage for everyone, and therefore he cannot be even seen, even if it's technically legally correct. He should not be, he has to recuse himself and not be giving advice, one-sided advice to any of his relatives. All right, fascinating. And now we get to the next Mishnah. Lo katav la benin dichrin dihevu lichi minai inun yirtun kesef ketubatech yater al chulakon im achuhon chayav shehu tenai betin. Now we're going to get into some of the typical normal language that was in the Ketubot in the times of the Mishnah. And this is one as the line for Benin Dichrin, Ketubot Benin Dichrin, that says, male children, he writes in the Ketubah, any male children that I will have with you, that we will have from this marriage, from this man and this woman, inun yirtun, kes they will inherit the money of your Ketubah, so that if he dies first, she gets the Ketubah. And if she dies first, then the man still has to pay the Ketubah to her sons, even if he has other sons from other marriages. And so in that case, all the sons will split the inheritance equally. That's true. But she wants to make sure that the money that's owed her for the ketubah, even though she dies first, will go to her son specifically. So that when the man dies, she dies first, then he dies. When he dies, then the payment first goes to pay the ketubah to those sons of her, and only after that's deducted, then they split the rest of it. So they get the ketubah, the sons of this marriage get the ketubah, above and beyond the share of all of the inheritance with the other brothers. So even if you don't write that in the ketubah, he still has to pay it, because that's a stipulation of the court. People get married, Kedat Moshe v'Yisrael, according to the law of Moses and Israel, and therefore they are including, even if they don't write it, these stipulations. Now, the next one is Benan Nukvan, for daughters of that marriage, Tehevan Lichi Minai, that you will have with me, Yehevyan Yatvan Bebeti Umitzananan Mitzenan Minechasai Adeti Lakhun Legubrin. Even after the man dies, the inheritance has to pay for as long as these daughters live in my house, the man is saying, meaning until they get married. If they get married and move out of the house, then their husbands have to take care of them. But if they're minors and they're living in the house, then they will be sustained from my property until they are taken by men in marriage. So even if he skips that provision to sustain that that his property will have to sustain his daughters, even if he doesn't write it, chayav. Still, the inheritance does have to pay for them. Shehutenai betin. Okay, so the wife wants to make sure her sons are taken care of, her daughters are taken care of, and finally, at tehe yatba bebeti umidzena menechasai kol yoma yomeh megad al menutech bebeti. And now she herself also wants to be taken care of after he dies. We want to make sure that the inherited property will pay for her sustenance as long as she lives in the house. If she gets remarried, then her new husband will take care of her. Even if he doesn't write it, chayav shehutenai betin. Kach hayu anshe Yisrael kotvin, and the people in Jerusalem used to write that language. Anshe Galil hayu kotvin kanshe Yisraelim. Also in the Galilee, they would write the same way they wrote in Jerusalem. But anshe Yehuda, the people in Judea, Jerusalem is in Judea, but Jerusalem was different. The other cities around in the south of Israel would write a different language. They would say that the property of the father that the sons inherit they have to pay for the sustenance of the father's wife until the inheritors, decide to pay out the ketubah. So they can choose if they can continue to sustain her while she's in the house, while she's not married for long term, or they can pay out the amount of a ketubah in one lump sum, give it to her, and then she's on her own and she will sustain herself from the ketubah. So in Judea, that's what they would write. Therefore, since that's the way it's written, that's what they can do. And if they want to simply write that simply give her a ketubah in one lump sum, then that's it. They don't have to pay for her sustenance. So they can make that the ketubah was a significant amount. They might have to sell land and all that in order to pay the ketubah. So maybe it would be better for them to keep that land and let things grow on it and pay gradually rather than all at once. Amar Rabbi Yochanan mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. B'pnei ma hitkinu ketubat benin dichrin. So Rabbi Yochanan says, name Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. What's the reason that the rabbis instituted that one must write in the ketubah, and if he doesn't say it, he still has to give the sons, pay the sons the amount of the ketubah if their mother died first? The reason is so that a father of a bride will want to jump up and write for his daughter a dowry that will be as big as a portion that his son would get as an inheritance. In other words, if a father of a bride is there, he wants his daughter to get married. Now, if he knows that I'm going to give money into the marriage, if he thinks that should his daughter die, then this husband is going to take all that money and inherit it, and then when he dies, it will be split among all of his other sons. So then a father is not going to be willing to give a lot of money because it's going to be split up to people he's not related to. But if you write the stipulation, if you have the stipulation in there, then the father of the bride knows that even if his daughter dies before him, nevertheless, the money that he's giving into the marriage, which is included in the ketubah, will go to his grandsons. So then he'd be willing to give a large dowry, and that will help his daughter get married. And so that will be a benefit. So by requiring the husband to keep that dowry amount and all the ketubah in the family, the sons of that marriage, that will encourage the father to give more, and that will help everyone. Okay, Mika midi de Rachamana amar bera lidut, berata latirut, vatura banan mtakene de terut berata. Hold on, can you do something against the Torah? Rachamana, God Hashem in the Torah says that sons inherit and daughters do not inherit. And now the rabbis are coming and making a decree, and although it kind of works through a ketubah, so it's not that the daughter is inheriting, but effectively this money that the husband that the wife brought into the marriage as a dowry is going to be basically inherited by the wife's sons, but she is not someone that inherits, and so she now this daughter who's the bride is going to get as much as kibno, right, as much as her brothers would get, effectively, because it will go to her, it'll go to her sons. And so is this right that a daughter should get as much as sons when the Torah says it should only go to sons? How can the rabbis make an enactment that would go against the Torah? And the answer is Hanameh deoraitahu. In fact, we can find a biblical source for this rabbinic enactment as well. Although it's not in the Torah itself, it's in Navi. Tichtiv, kechu lachem, kechu nashim, ve'olidu banim ubanot, uchu libnechem nashim bet benotechem tenu la'anashim. When Yirmiyah is telling Bnei Yisrael, listen, you're going to go into exile, but don't despair. When you're in exile, go and marry off your sons and daughters and have families and live, continue to live, because you're going to come back to Israel. So, but his language formulation is very specific. Take wives for yourselves, you're the men he's talking to, and have sons and daughters, and take wives for your sons, and give your daughters to husbands. Make sure you marry off your kids. Now, Bishlam Abanim Bideh Kaimeh. It makes sense that he says, take wives for your sons, because the boy side is proactive. They're the ones that he's going to ask out girls on dates. The father of the groom is the one that's going to initiate and say, we'd like to have your daughter in marriage. So it makes sense that they can arrange that. Ela benate mi kaiman bideh. But for daughters, is it in their power to go and just marry themselves off? The husband has and his family have to initiate. So how can this be fulfilled? Hakamash malan denalbesha v'nichsa v'neteb la midi kihechi dekafseh ala ve'atu nasbe la. Rather, it means that a father should dress and cover and give gifts, property, jewelry, whatever it is, to make his daughter attractive. Not only physically attractive, but also financially, so that the boys, the men, will come and jump to try to marry her. So yes, even though they're not initiating the marriage, the dates and the marriages, nevertheless, there's a lot that the bride and her family can do to make sure that she will get married. So you see, this is giving a biblical source for the idea that a dowry should be large. And since we want to encourage fathers to give a large dowry to their daughters, so the rabbis fulfilled this by making a takana. This is, don't worry, if you give your daughter a large dowry, you don't have to worry that then the husband will inherit it and he will give it to his other families. No, it will stay within even if your daughter dies, it will go to her sons, your grandchildren, so it'll all stay in the family. Okay, vad kama, how much should one give to one's daughters? Up above we said it should be equivalent to what one's sons acquire. In the inheritance, so Rabbi said it should be up to 1/10 of one's property. That's the right amount to give 10%. I suppose it depends on how many daughters he has, how many sons he has, how much he has altogether, but that is an average amount. Okay, ve'ema de'av lidut, de'ba'al lo lidut. If the whole point of the takana benin dichrin is so that the father of the bride would give a large dowry, so then let the sons of their deceased mother, inherit only what the bride's father gave into the marriage, the avlerot, but whatever the husband promised in the ketubah, they should not inherit. What that has nothing to do with the father's dowry. The amount that the husband said, I'll give you 200 zuz plus whatever else he added in, what does that have to do with increasing the dowry? No, if a husband what the husband promised is not going to go to his grandchildren, then he's not going to want to give a dowry either. He's going to say, this guy is not willing to take care of my grandchildren. Why should I take care of them? And so it's kind of like matching funds. If the husband agrees to give that amount to not only to the wife but also to their sons, then the father of the bride will say, okay, I'll chip in a lot as well. Now, if the whole reason why the sons will inherit, her sons will inherit whatever the husband promised in the ketubah, is only so that to encourage the father to give a big dowry, then we should say, in a case where the father gives a dowry, then the husband also has to write that his ketubah will be given to the sons. But if the father does not write a dowry, then there's no need for the husband to write that whatever he was going to give to her will go to the sons. And it says, Lo pelug rabbanan. The rabbis are not going to make a distinction between every single little case, since most of the cases a father does write a dowry. Therefore, that's the law in all cases, that whatever the husband was promised in the ketubah also gets inherited by the sons of that marriage. But ben habanim name terut. Hold on. Now, if this couple has only a daughter, and the father has sons from other marriages, in that case, the law is that the sons inherit everything, and a daughter does not get the payout of a ketubah. This is called benin dichrin. A daughter will get fed from the inheritance, but she does not inherit the ketubah. If the whole point is so that the father of the bride will know that it's kept in the family, so why not let it go to his granddaughter also? No, the rabbis, when they made this enactment, they made it using the similar tools and language of an inheritance. And daughters don't inherit, so they can't get this ketubah payout. Now, bat ben habanot terut. What if the father has one daughter, and he has no sons at all? He has a daughter from this marriage and other daughters. In that case, since there are no sons, why not let this daughter, each of the daughters, will get the payout of the ketubah from their mothers? Instead, the law is that they all just share the inheritance equally. And here, lo pelug rabbanan. Again, the rabbis are not going to make, when to make a decree, they make it across the board, and they say this works through inheritance. So if it's sons, then they get that special inheritance of their mother's ketubah, and it goes to sons. But if there's no sons, then they're not going to make a distinction between not make a distinction that daughters should get it. So rather, they're just treated as regular inheritors without special inheritance of their mother's ketubah. If the point is that the amount that the dowry goes to the grandsons, well, the father gave property, but he also gave items, jewelry, clothing, and those are movable items. Since the father gave movable items in the dowry, so then the sons should also be able to collect movable items from the ketubah, but that's not the law. The law is that they collect only from land. And the answer is ketubah shavu rabbanan. They made it the same as the ketubah payout, which can be collected from land, but not from movable. So even though the reason originally would have to obligate movables, but since the mechanism that the rabbi used is ketubah, inheritance, so therefore has to follow the more normal rules of how a ketubah is collected. Titrof mimishabedeh. Well, what about land that the father had a lien? There was a lien on that land, and the father had sold in the meantime. How come the sons can't repossess that land for the payout of their mother's ketubah? And the answer is yirtun tenan. No, it says inherit. Inheritors, sons who inherit, cannot go and repossess land that the father had sold. They only get whatever land that the father has currently when he dies. Now, there's another law that the benin dichnin, the sons can only get the payout of the ketubah if after that payout there'll still be at least a dinar left over in the property, so that all the other sons can split it. If after the payout there's not even a dinar left, then the sons of that mother cannot get the ketubah. So why is that? If the whole point is that the father's dowry should go to them, so it goes to them. Why does it matter if there's a dinar left over? Because the rabbis have to make sure that the basic doraita law will be fulfilled. And the basic Doraita law is that all the sons have to inherit. So there has to be something left over to fulfill the biblical inheritance law. So yes, the rabbi said, in addition, because they also want to follow the pasuk in Yirmiyah, that they want to encourage big dowries by the fathers of the bride. So then, yes, they can make an enactment in addition to the biblical law, but they cannot replace the biblical law. So therefore, one only gets the payout of the benin dichrin if there is a dinar left over to fulfill the biblical law. Baruch Adonai Leolam, Amen v'Amen.